Okay, welcome to part 2 of my little rant. In part 1 we talked about the beginning of America and how the spoiled little rich brats had to bring a bunch of slaves to do the work for them. It's really interesting how a lot of the haves and a lot of the elite rich look at the world versus how a lot of middle class, I can't even really say middle class because a lot of middle class are blind to what's really going on, and they either want to remain in their state of ignorance is bliss, or they're too afraid to do anything about their situation. So I guess it's really comes down to the elite versus the extremely lower class people. First of all, I pretty much grew up as I guess you could say middle class. My interpretation at the time was middle class, but in all actuality, now that I'm older and really understand how things work, we were actually just barely over the poverty level, if you could even call it that. But, you know, I had a stable house for many years, so I guess we were middle class. I'll call it lower middle class just for the sake of argument, because, you know, we didn't have anything, we almost never had anything new, but we got by, and my parents did really good. When I was growing up and going to school, and even the influence from my parents, and even my aunt, who had a really good union job in the Midwest for her entire life until she retired. Up until the time I actually started working, well, even the entire time I worked, I still believe this was true. If you work hard and you give 100% to what you're doing, then you'll be rewarded for your efforts. When I was younger, I grew up, my father was a musician, so I kind of picked that up, and so I was very musical and was in a couple garage bands here and there, played a couple live shows here and there, and never made it to big rock stardom like I wanted. But you know, it was all fun, and that was the point. It was more, we all wanted to be big rock stars and make all the money, but at the same time we still had a lot of fun doing it, and that was the main point of it, to have fun. So I grew up as a musician carpenter. When I started working at 17, I started as a carpenter, or a carpenter's helper. You always have to start at the bottom. I always thought being a carpenter was a very honest living, and I would go to work 5 or 6 days a week, 8 hours a day, sometimes more. So I was putting in my 40 hours a week, like everybody likes to quote, you have to work 40 hours a week or you're a scumbag. So I did my time, and I worked. I was one of the best carpenters towards the end. I was getting phone calls at least once a week from other crews offering me, you know, a quarter raise here and a quarter raise there to leave my, you know, current employer and go work for them. But, you know, that just wasn't, I didn't see that as being, you know, ethical. My ethics were, you know, I worked for this person and they paid my paycheck and I got a little raise here and there, and, you know, it just wasn't ethical for me to just dump them like a hot potato and go work for somebody else for another quarter an hour, you know. It's not working to dump an employer and to make another $5 a week. At least that was my interpretation. That was my ethic standard. I was being loyal to my employer. Well, most people would think that if you're loyal to your employer and you go to work every day and you do your job, you get rewarded. Wrong answer! Okay, so here's my story of being a carpenter for 15 years. Well, I did a couple other trades here and there that were actually better, but the pay sucked. But we'll talk about that later. The very first couple guys that I worked for, it's funny, I ended up working for them off and on for 8 years. They were a couple brothers, and they were really cool guys. I started at $5 an hour. I think that was minimum wage when I started in '87. My very first job with me and my friend were we would go to this day labor place, and we would just work whenever we wanted, and we made like, you know, it was minimum wage, like $5.50 an hour or $5 an hour, I don't even remember. So me and my buddy had a great time. We were teenagers, we were just out of school. Well, I had dropped out the year before, but I think he did too. But anyway, we were working. And the really cool thing about the day labor thing, when you're a teenager and you still live with mom and dad, is we would go do this day labor thing just whenever we wanted. We weren't, you know, tied to, you know, 40 hours a week. I mean, a lot of times we did go every day because, you know, we liked having $30 a day. It was pretty nice. So I met these two brothers working for this day labor place, and they offered me a job. So my first job was $5 an hour, you know, cleaning up after a couple carpenters, and I eventually got into, once I actually started working for them, I started learning how to be a carpenter, and you know, I was, you know, hauling wood and nailing things together, you know, what carpenters do, and but after working for these guys off and on for 8 years, I had learned the trade, and I could do everything they did without them having to babysit me, and it was really cool because I finally reached that point of you know, you call it self-sufficiency or whatever. Between the time I started and the time I left, over a period of 8 years, I started for $5 an hour and I left making $8 an hour. And you think about it, that's like 50 cents a year. I don't know, you do the math, I don't even care. The point is, after 8 years, you know, I was only making $3 an hour more than when I started. And you know, a lot of people look at carpenters and they see these dirty people in beat up cars, and the automatic assumption is that you're a scumbag, alcoholic, and you shouldn't even roam the face of the earth. And I really just, that mentality just blows me away, because some of the lowest paid people on the face of this earth are some of the ones that do some of the most needed services to society, and we're treated like crap. I mean, think about it. If you didn't have all these scumbag, alcoholic carpenters making $8 an hour, who the hell is going to build your house? I don't know any doctors or any lawyers that can build their own house. I just don't, because they're doctors and lawyers, and that's their job.